Hi everyone, welcome to the latest episode of PhD-Politico discussions. I'm really excited today to be joined by Liberal Democrat MP for Richmond Park, Sarah Olney. Hi Sarah, how are you?
Hi, Adam. I'm really well. Good to be here.
It's good to have you on. Hopefully this is going to be a really interesting conversation. So I just want to start by asking, why did you get into politics and why specifically the Liberal Democrats?
So I didn't get into politics until quite late in life, actually. I was I've been probably in my late 30s, I think. Had my children already. And I think it was more, I was looking for sort of, I wouldn't say a way to fill my time. I had two young children. I wasn't looking for, for like stuff to do, but definitely wanted to get out of the house a bit and not just be a mum and working full time, and I just needed a bit of time for myself. So I was looking for, if you like, a new hobby. The 2015 general election came along with, the results that everybody knows about, and I just remember feeling really angry about it. I'd always been a Lib Dem voter, but never been involved in politics. It wasn't something we really did in our family, or didn't know anyone who was involved in politics. Not something I'd done at university or anything like that. And I just decided, there's no point sitting on the sofa shouting at the telly. You've got to kind of, if you're really angry about how things are going, you've got to get involved. You've got to take responsibility. You've got to go and do something. So I joined the Liberal Democrats in my local area, and where I live in southwest London is Kingston Borough. And so I trotted off to join Kingston Liberal Democrats, and not long after I joined, there was a council by-election. We needed to get a new councillor elected in a ward not far from where I lived. So went out and about, did a bit of canvassing, bit of leafleting. First time in my life I'd ever done such a thing. And I don't remember ever having been canvassed in my life either. So it took a lot of explaining. And I remember being horrified at the idea of walking up people's paths when they were having their dinner, knocking on their door and asking them how they were going to vote. But it was fine. It went really well. I've obviously done it, knocked on many thousands of doors since then. So it was fine. And it was such a great campaign, and we got the councillor elected by the biggest margin we'd ever won by in Kingston over the Tories. So that was motivating. But in the course of that campaign, I met Ed Davey, who, of course, in 2015 had just lost his Kingston and Surbiton seat after 18 years. But he was out pounding the pavement, really keen, knocking on all those doors like a demon, really wanted to get this councillor elected. And I remember being really impressed and thinking to myself, wow, you weren't in it just for you, were you? You want to get Lib Dems elected at every level. And I've just been quite inspired by that. And ever since, that's kind of been my mission. Just because I really deeply I have felt for the last, getting on 6 years now, I guess, but, before that as well, that politics has just been hijacked by the extremists, and we need people who are, genuinely thinking about, the big issues that are facing our country and really coming up with ideas to tackle them. And the more I get involved in politics, and I have now got involved fairly deeply, I think it's fair to say, the more I've realized, how much of these big decisions and these big discussions are just take place at a purely political level about winning votes and leveraging, and even the budget, which was the day before yesterday. It's all about giving sweeties to people in Teesside so they'll vote for the mayor up there, or up in West Midlands or something like that. So I really want politics to get back to, maybe I'm dreaming that there was a halcyon age when people actually sat down and had serious discussions about serious issues, but I really feel everybody's interests would be better served if we could do that and find some kind of consensus on, instead of trying to leverage as much of one extreme as you possibly can to get a marginal victory over the other side. And not about demonizing your opponents or being personal abuse and all of this. So anyway, that was my motivation. And sometime after that by-election, we were at a local fundraising curry, and Ed was there, and Tim Farron was there, who was party leader at the time. And Ed was kind of like, they're looking for a new candidate in Richmond Park. And Kingston Borough is divided. Most of it's in Kingston and Surbiton, but the top third of it is in Richmond Park. And that happened to be the bit that I lived in. And I was like, ooh, no, stand for Parliament, me. But within a year, not only had I, put myself forward to be the candidate and been selected, but a by-election had been called because that goal.
I'm assuming you didn't know that was going to happen. You were probably thinking, I won't have to stand for a number of years.
I think a lot of people in the local party were anticipating it because he'd said it, but because I hadn't been deeply involved in politics, it had slightly passed me by, and so people sort of mentioned it as a possibility, but I didn't think of it as a realistic possibility or an immediate possibility. I just genuinely thought, and Zach had a majority of 23,000 at the time, which is quite a majority. So I didn't anticipate that when I stood, if I was going to stand as a candidate, that I had any chance of overturning that majority. I just thought it'd be a fun thing to do. And, we would probably leverage most of our resources in South West London to getting Ed back in, or his successor in Kingston and Surbiton, because obviously a much smaller Tory majority there and a much better chance of getting it back. So I didn't, and obviously Twickenham as well, which Vince Cable had just lost. So those would have been the focuses. But then suddenly along came this by-election. It was just the most extraordinary experience, really. I was there just in the middle of this whirlwind, and of course I'd had no experience at all of a parliamentary election. There hadn't been any since I joined. No experience of being a candidate, because obviously I hadn't even stood as for a position in the local party, never mind standing for council or anything like that. I'd never been a candidate, so I was just wandering around doing what I was told, pretty much. And which I think endeared me to quite a few of the campaign team, to be fair. And I didn't expect to win. I was working at the time as an accountant at the National Physical Laboratory in Teddington, and they very kindly allowed me 5 weeks off unpaid to go and campaign. And I said to them, well, bye, I'll see you on December the 5th, bye. And I had to ring them the next day. And I was kind of like, oh, hello, it's Sarah. And they were like, oh, we've seen you on the telly. You're not coming back, are you?
I remember it was such a big, obviously, the news. I mean, that's the thing. I can't imagine what that must be like, not just standing for the first time, but in such a unique experience. Because obviously, at a general election, there's 650 seats.
Yeah. And I think as well, and I mean, I look back on it now and I'm slightly amazed at myself, but I think at the time, just, taking one day at a time, and because I was so new to everything and so completely inexperienced, I quite literally didn't know what I was doing. So having that lack of awareness of, what a by-election campaign is, what the significance would be, and genuinely right up to the very last minute, not expecting to win. So I was never focused on, what will I do if I become an MP? What would be the impact of this? Just literally wasn't in my mind at all. I was just having the time of my life on the campaign trail. All of these amazing Liberal Democrats from all over the country coming down to Richmond Park to help. I was doing a Zoom call with Greater Manchester Lib Dems last night and their mayoral candidate. And a bunch of them remembered me from 2016, and I was just like, people. And it was a really nice occasion for Lib Dems as well. They'd had a fairly, a lot of them had a fairly rough few years. Obviously, there was a coalition, awful 2015, dreadful referendum result, and then slap bang in the middle of my by-election campaign, Trump got elected in America. There was a lot of despairing liberals around in November 2016, and coming down to my by-election, and because it was such a successful campaign, and I say that entirely because it was largely other people's responsibility. I was very much just the face and the voice. People had a great experience. They were coming back to the campaign office going, oh, I've knocked on these doors and people are pleased to see us. He says, I've forgotten what that feels like. And people were genuinely really enjoyed it. So I think it was a real kind of fillip, if you like, to Liberal Democrats anywhere. So people had a really nice time on that campaign. And probably forgotten about this now, but we'd had the Whitney by-election campaign because David Cameron had stood down from his seat. Liz Layman, she had a wonderful campaign and did really, really well. And that was only a few weeks before. So we were on a bit of a roll, So it was, people were rediscovering the joy in being a Lib Dem again. But genuinely, like I said, was not expecting to win. I was expecting a bit of a repeat of Whitney, that we would do well, we would come back, we would get a lovely swing, but not winning at all. And it wasn't until they were actually covering the count on the telly. It was the This Week programme, which used to be on after Question Time on Thursday nights, and Andrew Neil was doing a special, and Chris Mason was reporting from the count. And Chris Mason was doing his piece to camera, and I could see over his shoulder my campaign manager, and he was laughing. And it's the only time I'd seen him smile in the entire campaign. And I remember just getting this kind of prickle down my back, going, "Oh my God, why is he smiling?" And so yes, it was a totally unexpected win from my point of view, and.
That does surprise me, because it wasn't. It was obviously close, but it wasn't marginally close. It was by a thousand. You won by 1,000 votes.
1,876.
That's my point. I'm surprised you weren't more prepared to. I mean, it must have been.
I mean, it was partly, as I say, my own lack of experience. I mean, now I am, obviously being a former accountant, I'm all about the spreadsheet anyway. But now I'm kind of like, show me the box counts. What's the canvassing telling us? But I didn't know any of this stuff at the time. I was, in many ways, it was the perfect introductory campaign. It would have been, if I hadn't been standing, if you see what I mean. If someone else had been the candidate, it would have been the perfect way for me as a new Lib Dem to really understand about how parliamentary campaigns worked. But because when I was the candidate, I was just not focused on any of this. It was very much, I was still learning so much about, knocking on doors, about, how to put together a good leaflet, how to take a good photo, how to do press, everything was just this massive learning curve. And I don't know if I was just being stubborn about it or whether I genuinely just didn't realize, but it was a kind of, I'm not going to win, I'm just having a good time.
So I'm just wondering, what was that? Obviously, you obviously then were thrown into the House of Commons, as it were, at quite an interesting period in political history, I think it's fair to say. What was that? I mean, that must have. And what was that experience like, entering Parliament, entering the House of Commons? Obviously, you have to. There's very specific rules. There's very certain ways.
Well, I tell you what, it was quite funny on my first day. So obviously the election was on the Thursday, and then the following Monday I went up to London. Been up to London many, many times. My daughter was born in St Thomas's Hospital. I'd been a student at King's, so that area of London is somewhere I knew really well. So spent lots of my, various times of my life looking at the Houses of Parliament. So it wasn't as if for me it was this kind of like suddenly like really, over-awing experience or anything like that. So but I was walking over Westminster Bridge, as I had done quite a few times before, and for various different reasons. And as I was looking at it, that's my workplace. Will you look at that? I was like, nope, still weird. And I went in, you go to the visitors' entrance at Portcullis House, and I'm busy, like, having my bag scanned and, whatever, putting it all in the tray. Yeah. And the security guard said, "And what's the purpose of your visit today, madam?" And I was just like, I just bawled at him for a bit. I couldn't think what to say. Excuse me. I was like, I've just been elected as an MP. It's just the most weirdest thing. I found it really difficult to describe. And then I have to tell you, top tip: you don't have to go through security if you're an MP. There's a special MP door you get to go through because you're. And he told me, oh no, it was the head of security I had a meeting with later on, and he told me that they're not allowed to prevent my access because I'm a democratically elected member of Parliament, and so no one is allowed to stop me entering. And I was quite surprised at that I've just given a pass, and I was like, I would have thought there would have been like 6 forms to fill in triplicate with my parents' last 4 addresses or something, and it's like no. So if you want to dodge all the security, get elected to Parliament. It saves a lot of time. But yeah, no. I tell you what was really strange to start with was the contrast between the atmosphere on the campaign and the atmosphere in the parliamentary party, because there were 8 MPs, all male, left over from 2015, and obviously there was a bit of a flurry about the fact that I was the first. That finally there was a woman. But I wouldn't. I can say it now. I probably wouldn't have been quite so open about it at the time, but there was not a happy bunch of people. And I think partly they were still recovering from the trauma of 2015, and then, compounded by the trauma, if you like, of the referendum.
Yeah.
But they weren't natural allies either. I guess if there had been cliques in the pre-2015 parliamentary party, then, they wouldn't all have been in the same one. So they weren't natural allies, and there was not a great feeling of teamwork amongst them. So to have come off the back of that fantastic, by-election campaign where everyone was so positive and, proactive and really energetic, to go into, I would say, this rather demoralized and not terribly unified parliamentary party was a contrast, and it was a massive shock. And I have to tell you, it's difficult coming into parliament in the middle of a parliament. Having done it both ways now, I can tell you that when you join a parliament at the beginning of a new parliament, everything is laid on for you. They've got people, you get inductions, you get tours, you get people showing you around, people showing you how your computer works. People explaining how Parliament works, and I can't tell you how invaluable that is, but you don't get any of that if you're a by-election winner. So it was very, just as you said there, very much being thrown in at the deep end, which was quite challenging. And not least, of course, because all the reasons I was saying earlier, but very not planning to win, never had previously thought about becoming an MP, just thought it would be a bit of a laugh. So actually you pitch up and then you're like, right, what do I do now? And, what does an MP do? It's not like I'd spent my life planning for this moment and having like a whole set of campaigns that I really wanted to run or anything like that. And I didn't know many Liberal Democrats. I didn't know people who were looking for work as parliamentary researchers. I didn't know, people who'd previously worked in HQ who'd want to come and help and advise me. I didn't have anyone. So, it was quite isolating in that sense. But, now that I look back on it, it was really difficult at the time. But it was good to have that dry run in a sense. When I rejoined Parliament in December 2019, I'd made all the mistakes, I'd learned all the lessons, and I hit the ground running much more. So it was a lot easier for me then. But it was daunting. I would say.
I can't imagine what that must be like. So moving to 2017, obviously you lost by 45 votes, which I can't imagine how horrible that must be.
I'm over now.
Incredibly, it wasn't even the closest win. Of course, you had North East Fife, which was just 2 votes.
I know,
Obviously unlucky, but it was a weird election, I guess, from the Lib Dem perspective. Because obviously you lost your seat, but overall it was a relatively positive result. Obviously gaining a hand.
No, it was odd. I mean, it was not a nice night. We had so what normally happens is you'll have a bunch of people in the count room and they'll be sort of overseeing the count and doing some of their own tallies, and just checking that the count is progressing the way it ought to. And the way it's happened all 3 times is I haven't been there at the count. I've been at home, and when they think that the count is nearing the end and a declaration is going to happen in the next half an hour, I'll get a phone call and then I'll come over, which is nice because you're not waiting. So I was at home, and then I got a call at about 2 a.m, and they said, we think going to declare, and I said, don't think, it's very, very close, but we don't think we've won. They said, come over now. So I came out, actually it was probably quite a bit even earlier than that, sort of 1:30 or something like that. And then this was actually taking place at the Twickenham rugby ground, because there's nowhere in Richmond Park that's actually big enough to do the count. So they were doing the Twickenham and Richmond Park counts together. And so I arrived just in time to hear Vince's result being announced. And that was really great. And then I was bundled out of the room, and they're like, we're having a recount, you can't be seen. So I took refuge in the Marriott Hotel, which is next door. And I spent the next, 6 hours sat on a really uncomfortable sofa on a kind of mezzanine floor level with a telly. And I didn't dare go downstairs because I heard that Zach was in the bar in a really foul mood, and I thought, probably doesn't want to see me. And it was just so awful. But it was just uncomfortable, and then I was obviously on edge because I didn't know what was happening. Getting the occasional text message from next door telling me what was happening, but I was watching the screen and I was watching all these results coming in. I was like, Oxford, Western Abingdon, yeah, Ed's won, yeah, and it was just getting really sort of excited to see all these results rolling in. It's like Eastbourne, I didn't even know we were competitive in Eastbourne. Who's Stephen Lloyd? So it was it was nice to watch, but just all the time just going, what the heck's going on? And I remember it must have got to about 6 a.m, and they were starting to serve breakfast, so we thought we'd actually go and eat something. And I was sat there having some breakfast with my husband, and then my agent and my campaign manager came to find me, and I was like, is that it? And they were like, I was like, how much? And they were like, 45. And I was like, give me a minute, I'm coming. So it was awful. That was really bad.
Did you I was going to say, did you ever? I mean, obviously you stood again in 2019. When obviously straight after that, were you thinking, "I'm definitely going to stand again. I have to win this seat back"? Was that the immediate response,
That
or?
was that was what everybody else wanted me to do. I don't think,
Yeah.
and I was kind of, I think I felt I'll have to because that's what everyone wants. I don't think I was quite in that space at the time. And I didn't, I needed to go and earn a living. I didn't get any redundancy or anything like that because I've been an MP for less than 2 years. And my husband works full time. So we weren't kind of like out on the streets or anything like that.
Mm.
But nevertheless, household income severely curtailed and we had a mortgage to pay. So I needed to find a job, and everyone was kind of on my back about, there's going to be another election very soon. This isn't sustainable. Theresa May can't. So I found a job in Lib Dem HQ, actually, but it became clear that we weren't going to be, it wasn't going to be immediate. It wasn't going to be the next 6 months. So I drifted off and I went to work for Historic Royal Palaces, actually.
Yeah. Okay.
And I worked for them for about 18 months as an accountant. So I was kind of, took kind of like that decision to actually step right out of politics, or certainly professional politics, and at least be my own person for a bit. But yeah, it was kind of, I think by the time I'd stepped away from working for the Lib Dems, I was kind of like, yes, I know I will be the candidate, but I'm going to have to be the candidate on my own terms and
Yeah.
do it my way, sort of thing. So that was the kind of the impetus for stepping away. I had an absolutely wonderful 18 months working for Historic Royal Palaces. Really, really nice. So kind of swapping, kind of one palace of Westminster for Hampton Court Palace, actually, which is, I was actually working right in the Tudor Palace. So haven't fully got away from ancient and crumbling buildings. But yes, I think it was that kind of, it wasn't just, oh, everyone expects me to do it, so I suppose I'll have to. There was very much a sense of, I know I can. I know that I can beat Zach again. I've beat him before, I can beat him again. And I think it was much less about my own personal ambition, but harking back to what I was saying at the beginning, it was kind of like I want Lib Dems to win everywhere, and I'm the person who's best placed to beat Zach Goldsmith, so I'm going to do it. So it wasn't really like I desperately want to be an MP again. It was, I want there to be a Liberal Democrat MP in Richmond Park again, and I'm the best placed person to do it. So it was much more that kind of thing. But 2019 was such a different election campaign. It was so funny. It really was. I mean, 2017, it was still, it was a nasty election campaign. And even though the Brexit question wasn't settled by 2019, the amount of personal animosity and abuse and all of that sort of, so much less of it in 2019. We got a much more positive response. Bizarre. I don't quite understand where the difference came from, if you see what I mean. But Zach was clearly a busted flush by 2019 in a way that he wasn't in 2017. So it was quite interesting. So my third time round would have been my third time in 4 years, I guess. Third time in 3 years, possibly 4 years. It was just a very straightforward election campaign, and I wouldn't say we cruised to victory, but we knew from very early on that we were doing well, that it was going our way, that Zach didn't have enough to come back at us with, and that we knew the story wasn't great elsewhere, but somehow it all went our way in Richmond Park. And wouldn't say it was a foregone conclusion, but I certainly didn't get a massive shock. No, I did. The only massive shock I got was the size of the majority, I have to say. I assumed it would be of a similar measure to the time before. I'd win by about 2,000, 2,500. So to win by nearly 8,000 was really unexpected. So
that is really interesting. Obviously, you talk about how it felt less nasty, that campaign. Obviously, I mean, the national perception of politics 2019 was the general political scene was more nasty. I think it was horrible sort of divisiveness in the politics. So I'm quite curious that didn't happen in Richmond.
Yeah, I don't know what that was. It was really odd. I do remember just standing in the campaign office at one point, just scrolling through my personal Twitter feed, and I was like, someone changed the settings on this. I'm not seeing any of the rude messages this time. And my campaign manager was like, nope, genuinely, we're not getting stuff. And she said to me, I didn't show you half the stuff that came through the post in 2017. I didn't want to upset you.
Right.
So I'm very grateful to her for that.
Yeah.
But it's like I haven't had a single bit of abusive mail this time around. So that's the contrast. And I felt the contrast, if you like, in doorstep reactions and everything else. So I genuinely don't know. I don't know if it's just me. I'm just, fortunate in my winter campaigns and unlucky in my summer ones. But I mean, it felt like we were bucking the trend a bit in Richmond Park, because I think you're right about, the nastiness certainly hadn't gone away out of politics in general by 2019. If anything, Boris Johnson had done his very best to stoke it, and I won't forgive him for that exchange in the Commons between him and Paula Sherriff when she was talking about, the language he was using and how it was, directly leading to an increase in threats against female MPs, and he told her it was humbug. I haven't forgotten that. But my personal experience was it wasn't as bad as 2019. But I can't explain that.
It's just interesting. I mean that whole thing about obviously female MPs, especially particularly female, all MPs, but particularly female MPs, the amount of abuse they get is absolutely just abhorrent. I can't imagine. I always like, you have to appreciate the strength of especially female MPs for wanting to get involved because of just how horrible it is. And also,
I mean, sorry, yes, carry on.
As I said, I mean, people forget that, of course, Joe Cox was assassinated in 2016. People forget that, and it's so horrible the treatment MPs get. And I just can't imagine. Yeah,
I don't forget that, because that happened a week before I was selected as the Lib Dem candidate, and I just remember hearing about it when I was at work and getting a text from my husband as I was leaving the office that day. He said, "Have you heard about this?" And I was just like, He's like, "Are you sure you still want to do this?" And I was like, "Yes, I'm sure, because if I don't, then the awful people win, the people who do this kind of thing, and the people who get away with it." And I feel quite strongly, and I feel strongly still, that that's when the kind of the slide into sort of bullying and then violence and then tyranny, and I might sound like I'm overstating a little bit, but that's when the slide begins, when respectable people, normal people, people of good values, feel like they can't get involved, feel afraid, feel like the political arena is not for them because of that kind of behavior. And I mean, I don't know that it takes particular, I wouldn't say I've been particularly courageous, but nevertheless I do feel very strongly that in Richmond Park, it boils down to, if I hadn't been prepared to stand, then Zach Goldsmith would be the MP. And it's like, do you want him to be your MP or not? I do not, because I neither like his politics nor his values. And so it's like, well, what are you going to do about it? And it's kind of like, if you say, I'm not going to do anything about it, then you're kind of allowing that to happen. So it's quite, to a certain extent, it's quite a stark moral choice. And when I say I don't think I've been particularly courageous, I haven't been faced with some of the appalling stuff that, Diane Abbott, for example, frequently gets a bad rap. But I had this discussion with my dad once, who's a Telegraph reader, and was telling me what an awful person Diane Abbott was. And I was like, have you any idea what Diane Abbott has to put up with? The obstacles Diane Abbott has to overcome every single day that your average white middle class Tory male MP doesn't have to overcome. I was kind of like, you just imagine what a different person Diane Abbott might have been if she wasn't having to do that every single day, and, I'm happy to say that gave him some pause for thought. But, it is that kind of, like I said, my experience hasn't been so particularly awful. But, it's ultimately, you've got to fight back against it. We've got to get back to a politics where we can have civilized discussions about the issues. I feel like we're getting a little bit closer. I feel like, and the pandemic, interestingly, has been quite effective on that, in as much as we are just talking about, it's Boris and the others, they won't ever resist an opportunity to make some party political point, but they have had to answer serious questions about how they're governing the country, and it's not been the wrong thing to ask those questions. So I feel in a sense that that's kind of forced the pace a little bit, but there's no doubt that political division has been stoked, and it will be again, I'm sure. But the key to that is people who don't want to see their politics being run that way have not only be prepared to stand up and be counted, but also they have to win.
Yeah.
You know, it's all very well being Mr. or Mrs. Nice, but that has to overcome, you know, people who are, you know, otherwise motivated.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So obviously, so 2019 generally the general election wasn't a very good. It wasn't very good for the Liberal Democrats. Obviously, Joe Swinson lost her seat. I think Tom Brake lost his seat. A couple of other sort of big hitters sadly lost their seats from the Liberal perspective. So, I mean, looking at the party now, obviously Ed Davey is now leader as of August 2020, and it seems that the Lib Dems are in a bit of a weird place. They seem to be sort of in the polls around 6%, and I'm just wondering where does the party go from here in the post-Brexit?
It's really difficult. It's really difficult. I mean, it's not been a great time to be an opposition politician. You know, the coronavirus has really obscured everything else, and you know, and quite rightly, everybody's attention right now is how much longer is this going to go on for? When can I get my real life back? And nobody is really that engaged. I would say nobody, everybody has a little bit of interest, but there isn't a huge amount of engagement with any issue that's not, when can I get my life back? For some people, those are really, really fundamental questions. People who are running businesses, you know, that haven't been compensated, you know, that's literally an existential question. Like, I'm running out of money. When can I get it back out and earn a living? But obviously, for other people, it's an existential question. In as much as, you know, they've been ill, they've lost family members. So the coronavirus, quite rightly, has, you know, really obscured everything else. And as an opposition politician, you don't have a huge amount of wiggle room. That people are not very sympathetic to political opposition when the government are either appear to be doing what they can or doing their best or just doing whatever is necessary to be political and to be a political opponent on that. Doesn't always land terribly well. So we've having to straddle a kind of supportive of the government, asking questions of the government, not necessarily accepting that this is the right thing to do of the government, but at the same time encouraging all of our constituents to get their vaccine and to make sure that they're, you know, following the guidance and keeping them informed. So it's not a great time to be an opposition politician because people only care about the coronavirus at the moment. And I don't think that there's no value in trying to make the coronavirus a political dividing line. So we need to get back to politics as normal, when we can argue about spending and priorities and everything else. And I think in a sense, the budget this week, when we look back, I suspect we will look at the budget as a bit of a firing gun on, you know, returning to politics as normal, because there's been a real statement of priorities from the government this week, and that gives us something to argue about. And we can say, well, we wouldn't have done that. We would have done this. And, you know, because we're talking about like long-term spending priorities rather than dealing with the immediate crisis, that now that's something that we can start to develop dividing lines on. And the government have made some really rubbish choices. So we can start pointing them out at every possible opportunity. So I feel like there is a return. More importantly for us, as of Monday, this Monday coming, we can get back out and start campaigning again. And we've got a bumper set of elections coming up on May the 6th. It's really quite exciting. Here in Southwest London, we've got the London Mayor elections and the London Assembly elections, which we'll be fighting very hard to win the Southwest London constituency seat for. Right across the country, there'll be something like 300 to 400 council by-elections just to fill those vacancies that have arisen since the last time they were fought, and some of those sadly because of coronavirus. That's why there are vacancies. There will be all of the elections that were delayed from last year, all of the elections that were already due to be held this year. We have Holyrood, we have the Senedd, we have mayors in Liverpool and Greater Manchester and the West Midlands. It's, you know, it's a political geek's absolute wet dream, May the 6th, I tell you. But the great news for us is that we can start getting out on the doors again as of Monday. And because as a party, we are very much optimized for our grassroots campaigning. We've got a lot of feet on the ground and, you know, a lot of different places in the country. A lot of leaflets can be delivered. A lot of door knocking can be done. We've done a bit of Royal Mail delivery. We've done a bit of phoning, but we don't have the financial firepower to really get behind that kind of campaigning. But what we do have, and certainly down here, say down here in my constituency and surrounding constituencies, we have got a lot more volunteers to go knock doors than the Tories have. So we really need to be, back out and doing that. So I think this is the point at which we can start to see. And I've been talking to quite a few local parties around the country, just to encourage them in their campaigning efforts. And there's a really interesting picture emerging. I think we'll do well down here in Southwest London, because I think we'll build on the success that we've already had. The fact that we've had this sort of 12-month gap in our campaigning hopefully won't damage us too much. I'm very optimistic that we can win our constituency seat. But I'm interested to hear from other parties, particularly ones that are facing Labour, about their prospect. And every party I've spoken to, whether it's parties in the north that are facing Labour or parties in the southeast that are facing the Tories, a lot of optimism out there. And what I think people forget about 2019 is that there were 3 big major national elections that year. Obviously, the folk memory only remembers what happened to the general election, but we had a European election where we did incredibly well, but also we did amazingly well in the local elections that year.
Yeah.
And I don't entirely know what the impetus was for that really, really good performance in the local elections, but I don't think it was just Brexit. So I will just be interested to know whether some of that can be replicated this year, and whether we might spring some surprises. Like I say, Greater Manchester last night were optimistic about places they hadn't won before. I was speaking to Test Valley in Hampshire last weekend, and they were optimistic of making some gains. And what was it? Kingston upon Hull, also against Labour, think they can. So it's some really interesting places, because the bit that I don't see very often down in Southwest London is the Labour campaign, because they've pretty much left it to us down here, which is good. But they're not making progress. So if the Tories fall back, Labour are not well placed to pick up any disaffected Tories. So I don't know. I just think it will be really, really interesting. We won't see a uniform picture across the country, but I'd be really surprised to find that we don't make gains. As I say, that the picture for us has improved now that doorstep campaigning is allowed again. There's a lot of pent-up energy ready to go. A lot of donations, because people haven't had anything else to spend their money on. A lot of people were outraged at the idea they couldn't do delivery, so donated quite a lot for Royal Mail delivery, which has been really good. So we could spring a surprise. But I think what I'm saying is the pandemic has not been a great time to try and carve out your particular pitch as an opposition politician. And I'm sure you'll have seen that Keir Starmer is facing quite a lot of criticism and doubts and everything else. And I'm sure, I'm fairly certain that's the reason why. But also because we haven't been out on the pavement week after week. Every week there's a council by-election somewhere, and people sort of track the progress or whatever. And so you can't see us doing well in elections all over the country all the time. So, but I'm hoping for a good May the 6th, and I'm hoping that will be the game changer. And I do think that from now on we can start doing politics again, not just like in the literal sense of having elections, but also in the in the more theoretical sense, and start being a proper opposition in a way that it's just not really been feasible while we've been battling the pandemic. So I mean that's kind of I guess a sort of, if you like, operational answer to your question. But I think the only other thing I would say is I worry about Labour. I don't know where they're going. When I see them up close in Parliament, I just worry that their electoral coalition is splintering, and some of the working class elements of it are going to the Tories, and some of the sort of more liberal Remainy bits of it could come to us. And I slightly worry that the Tories at the moment and Labour are both going after the same set of voters, and only one of them can win, and the Tories are winning. And Labour either have to win them back, or they have to find a new bunch of people to appeal to, and they are not institutionally well set up to find a new coalition, because they're so rooted in the working classes and the labour movement and everything else, and that's where all their funding comes from and what all their structures are based around. It is not easy for them to pivot to a new group of voters. So it is basically, they'll be fighting the Tories for, older white working class voters in the industrial heartlands. And you know, so it's not easy to see where Labour go to from here. So I don't know. It's I think that's an interesting dilemma for them.
It is interesting. I mean, yeah, I definitely agree that maybe the sick PhD politics nerds like me will be absolutely fascinating.
I know. All these different
sounds,
races that I'm looking forward to now. Obviously, very keen to hear what's going on in my, but you know, I'm speaking to all these different local parties and so many interesting things going on all over the place.
Country. Sarah Olney, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate having you on. It's been really, really interesting.
Pleasure.
Cheers. Bye.
All right then. Bye-bye.
Hi guys, thank you for watching this latest episode of PhD-Politico Discussions. If you enjoyed this video, then please don't forget to give it a like. And if you want to watch more content like this, then please do subscribe. Bye guys.